Welcome to Heart of the Matter Radio with author and host Cynthia L. Simmons. How does a godly woman live in a world out of sync? Cynthia digs into the issues women face in our complex culture to set a path through the chaos. It's for women seeking the elegance of God's wisdom. So prepare yourself to listen, learn, and rest. Now here's your host, Cynthia L. Simmons.
We have an incredible country. The Constitution has given us incredible freedoms, unprecedented in history. In July, our country celebrates the day that we signed the Declaration of Independence and declared our independence from England. And so it's kind of the day that we remember the founding of our country. And I believe as parents and as teachers, it's important for us to remember our heritage and pass it on to our children so that they fully understand what they've got. Otherwise, they don't know if they lose it, what they've lost. So that's what we're going to talk about today. My guest is Rebecca Price Janney, and she is the author of the Easton series. And I understand there's a brand new book that's come out in that series just now. She's talking about one of her patriots that fought in the Revolution. And so she's going to share with us some ideas on how we can consistently share this heritage with our children. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you. It's great to be with you again, Cynthia.
Yeah, so share what this particular book that's come out is about.
It's the last in a series of 6 books about 2 people who live over 200 years apart. The first one is actually based on the life of my patriot ancestor, Colonel Peter Kishline, and his fictional descendant who lives now. But in learning about him and his life, she realizes there are strong parallels between their lives. And finding out more about him and his responses to the times in which he lived strengthens her for the times in which she lives. So in this last book, Easton at Sunset, I'm in the later years of Peter's life and come to kind of a pinnacle, if you will, of the way she sees him and the way he impacts her life.
I think that is always true of history because you get to watch people in the past respond to what they lived through. And I think we can learn so much from the past. And I think it is so great that you had an ancestor that was so major in history. I do have several ancestors that fought. They didn't do quite as big of things as Peter Kishline, but they did good things. So it's always good to know what your relatives did. So tell us a few things that perhaps your character learned from her patriot ancestor.
I think one of the things is integrity, that when you believe in something, when you believe especially that God has called you to fulfill a certain purpose, nothing should stop you in the pursuit of that. And she learned that Peter and those around him, the patriots with whom he associated, believed that theirs was a God-ordained cause. They called it the glorious cause. Mm-hmm. And if they did not obey God in what they had been called to do, they would be answerable to him, if not in this life, in the life to come. I think that's something that our current generation has totally lost sight of.
I think they have.
That accountability before God. So that's something she becomes aware of and realizes that it applies to every generation, including her own and especially herself. Not that she's been singled out, but that every person has some kind of God-ordained call upon their lives.
Well, you think about the New Testament and how John the Baptist called out the king of the Jewish king and said, you shouldn't be doing this. And of course, he did get in trouble for it. He lost his head, but he still felt very responsible for saying that. And I think today Christians are so hesitant to speak up because we feel like it's not appropriate. We've got to stay out of this. And I disagree with that.
I do too. I don't think there's ever been a time when believers have not been called to stand up for what is right and true.
Mm-hmm. Especially when it comes to life and liberty and freedom and that sort of thing. So tell me some ways in which we as parents, and some of us are homeschoolers, can instill those qualities of our forefathers and share that heritage with our children.
Well, I think the 4th of July offers us a marvelous example and opportunities of how we can do that. And I have come up with a list of some of the things that we can do to engage our children, homeschooled, public schooled, private schooled, grandchildren, in helping to connect them with our nation's past. And one of them that comes to mind is they might stage their own reading of the Declaration of Independence. Wouldn't that be fun?
That would be fun.
Have a little dress up, take whatever you have that might look like a colonial costume. And maybe from some family trip you took, you might have a tricorn hat somewhere in the closet or a mob cap, just simple dress up. And if you don't, you can just improvise, pretend. But I think having someone read the Declaration and others be part of the audience could be especially enlightening, because there are very few of us who are familiar with the entire text of the Declaration of Independence. Another idea that I have is for children to research their family tree. If they were like I was, I didn't know anything about my family's history until maybe a dozen years ago. And as a historian, I went and researched it because I was tired of not knowing. But now there are so many ways that this can be done. And one of the easiest ways is familysearch.org.
Yes.
It's free. And they can go in and, with their parents' or grandparents' help, begin to connect themselves with previous generations. And I think that's always fun to find out, well, when did our family come to America? Was it 50 years ago? Was it 100 years ago? My goodness, were they here at the Civil War or the American Revolution? It's such a fun journey. And I've never met anyone who started it and didn't get hooked.
Yes. And I think that's the answer, is that you end up getting hooked. My husband and I was doing it quite a bit. And when I finally started looking for his relatives, he got hooked. And we took a trip up into the mountains of Georgia, and I helped him find the grave of his great, great, great grandfather. And he was very excited about that. So it is fun. Yeah. Plus, you learn a lot of things along the way. So I think that's very worthwhile. What else?
You touched on one. It would be great to visit the grave of one of your ancestors. And when you're standing there and looking at those dates and looking at those names, there is a connection that you have with that person. Mm-hmm. If you don't know who you might visit, go to the local cemetery, preferably an older one, and look for the grave of a Revolutionary patriot. You could find one. They're identified basically by a pole that has an American flag attached and a little round disc that says Revolutionary War soldier. And write down the information about that person and then go home and research the person. I think that would be a fun thing to do. Some very easy things: fly a flag outside. You could have a little parade in your neighborhood. I know somebody who did this with her boys. She had them decorate their bikes in red, white, and blue and attached flags, I think, to the handlebars or a basket or wherever on the bike. And they started a parade around the neighborhood, and other kids joined along, and it was very memorable for them.
I think that's neat. Do you know, just off the top of your head, and I know I'm asking this, it may not be fair, what the colors of the flag symbolize?
Yes. And it's funny because I recently heard something that changed what I originally heard. Uh, White would be for purity, I believe, purity, honor. Red for blood, I believe, that
I think
is
it is.
shed. And I forget the blue. Can you help me with this?
I think it's for loyalty, but I could be wrong. But
That
it would
sounds
be,
right.
again, something worth searching
Something for
through as a
research.
family so
Mhm.
that there's not, you don't just hang a flag up and look at it, you understand the meaning behind it.
One of the activities I have is to look up the different variations of American flags over the centuries, have break out the crayons and markers and draw the flags. And while you're doing it, research the history of the American flag and what these things mean. What did the stars indicate? How many times was the flag changed? And when was the last time that it was changed? So I think that would be a fun activity.
I think that's lots of fun. And another thing you could do is get sidewalk chalk and do it in your driveway or your sidewalk.
Wonderful, wonderful idea. Then you're sharing it with the whole